The text came at 11:42 p.m. on Christmas Eve. "Sorry, Mom. We need your room for Jessica's parents. You can sleep in the garage. There's a cot set up. Should be fine for a couple of nights." I stared at my phone, the harsh blue light illuminating my face in the darkness of my car. I'd just driven 3 hours through a snowstorm to spend the holidays with my only son, David, and his new wife. Now, instead of the warm guest room I'd been promised, I was being relegated to a cold garage. No Merry Christmas. No thanks for making the drive in this weather. Not even a please. Just a last-minute text informing me of my demotion in the family hierarchy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This from the son I'd raised alone since he was 5 years old. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for. My career, my relationships, even my dream home. As I sat in my parked car outside the beautiful 2-story house I secretly owned, something inside me finally broke. The eternally accommodating mother in me died that night. In her place rose a woman who'd spent 26 years putting everyone else first and who was finally ready to remember her own worth. My name is Eleanor Carter, and for most of my adult life, I've been known simply as David's mom. It wasn't always that way. Before motherhood consumed my identity, I was Ellie, the ambitious real estate investor with a knack for spotting diamond-in-the-rough properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. The woman who worked 60-hour weeks and still found time to renovate historic homes on weekends. I still remember the thrill of closing a difficult deal and the satisfaction of seeing a neglected property transform under my care. Then came David, the result of a brief marriage to Michael, a charismatic architect with big dreams and an even bigger gambling problem. I didn't discover the extent of his addiction until we were already expecting David. By the time our son was 5, Michael had drained our joint accounts, maxed out multiple credit cards in my name, and disappeared to find himself in Vegas. The divorce papers arrived 3 months later, accompanied by a note explaining he wasn't cut out for fatherhood. I never planned on being a single mother at 33, but life rarely follows the paths we imagine for ourselves. I downsized dramatically, selling our stylish downtown condo and moving to a modest ranch house in Oak Ridge, a working-class suburb far from the upscale developments where I'd made my name. I scaled back my client list and turned down partnership, opportunities that would have required extensive travel. The pay cut was substantial, but I managed to maintain my small portfolio of investment properties, carefully squirreling away profits for David's future. We made it work in our little 3-bedroom house with its outdated kitchen and single bathroom. The schools in Oak Ridge weren't prestigious, but they were decent, with dedicated teachers who recognized David's quick mind and encouraged his interest in science and mathematics. David was worth every sacrifice. He was a bright, inquisitive child with his father's artistic eye and my determination. I still remember the way his small hand felt in mine as we explored open houses together on Sunday afternoons, my work and passion becoming our special bonding activity. How he'd assess crown molding and hardwood floors with adorable seriousness, mimicking the technical terms he'd heard me use with clients. For his birthday each year, I somehow managed to scrape together enough for a weekend at Cedar Lake Resort, a rustic collection of cabins nestled in the mountains 3 hours from our home. It wasn't luxurious, but those weekends became our tradition, our special time together under the stars, making s'mores and talking about his dreams. "One day I'm going to design eco-friendly skyscrapers, Mom," he'd say, sketching impossible structures in his notebook. "Buildings that generate their own power and have gardens on every floor. And you'll live in the penthouse apartment, so you can have the best view in the city." I'd smile and tuck those words away like precious gems, using them to light the dark moments when bills piled up or when I'd lose a promising property to investors with deeper pockets. In those moments, I'd think, it's all worth it. One day he'll achieve his dreams, and my sacrifices will have meant something. The 2008 recession hit us hard when David was in middle school. The real estate market collapsed overnight, and 3 of my investment properties went underwater. I sold my beloved vintage Mustang convertible to cover mortgage payments and took on a second job bartending on weekends to keep us afloat. There were months when I survived on coffee and the leftover food from David's plate. Growing boys need protein after all. He never knew about this. I became skilled at hiding our financial struggles, brewing strong coffee to mask my hunger, telling him I'd already eaten when I served him the last of the ground beef. "Mom, you work too hard," 15-year-old David said one night, catching me at the kitchen table surrounded by property listings at midnight. "I'm fine, honey," I assured him, hiding my exhaustion behind a smile. "I just want to make sure you have everything you need. When I grow up and get rich, you won't have to work anymore," he promised, planting a kiss on my forehead before heading to bed. "I'll buy you a mansion with a home office so you can still do the real estate stuff you love, but only if you want to." I held on to those words through his turbulent high school years, when college applications loomed and the realization hit that we couldn't afford most of the architecture programs he dreamed of attending. I sold our ranch house and moved us into a 2-bedroom apartment to help with tuition at State University, the only decent school with an architecture program that had offered him a partial scholarship. To my surprise, David didn't complain about commuting to college from our apartment during his freshman year. By then, he'd abandoned his eco-friendly skyscraper dreams in favor of luxury residential developments. "That's where the real money is, Mom," he'd explained, spending most of his time studying or at campus networking events. It was during his junior year that David met Jessica Reynolds. She came from Bayside Heights, the city's wealthiest enclave. Her father, Robert, was a prominent commercial developer who'd built half the shopping centers in our metro area, and her mother, Victoria, was a former model who now ran an exclusive interior design firm catering to the ultra-wealthy. The first time David brought her home, I saw the way her eyes scanned our modest apartment, taking in the secondhand furniture and the water stain on the ceiling from last spring's leak that the landlord still hadn't fixed. I'd made my famous lasagna, spending more than I should have on good cheeses and organic beef, wanting to impress this girl who clearly had grown up with much finer things. "It's very cozy," Jessica said, picking at her food while David watched her with puppy dog eyes. "David tells me you're in real estate, Mrs. Carter," she continued. "Yes, for almost 20 years now," I confirmed, noticing she'd barely touched the lasagna. "Mostly residential sales and some small investment properties." "That's dedicated," she replied with a tight smile. "My father always says real estate is the only true path to wealth, but of course he works exclusively in luxury commercial development. Mother and I just renovated our guest house. It's actually bigger than this. Entire apartment. You should see what she did with the space." I nodded, swallowing the unspoken message. "Your contribution is small. Ours is significant." That night marked the beginning of subtle changes in David. He started commenting on things he'd never noticed before: the apartment's cramped kitchen, my practical sedan, the fact that I still bought some clothes from thrift stores. "Mom, don't you think it's time to upgrade a little?" he asked once after returning from a weekend at the Reynolds waterfront mansion. "You've been driving that same car for like 7 years." "It still works perfectly fine," I'd replied, not mentioning that buying a new vehicle would mean dipping into the emergency fund I'd been slowly rebuilding after the recession. After graduating with honors, David landed a job at Reynolds and Associates, his girlfriend's father's development company. With his first paycheck, he bought himself an expensive watch that cost more than our monthly rent. "For making the right impression, Mom," he explained, and moved into a sleek high-rise apartment in Bayside Heights that I suspected Jessica's parents were heavily subsidizing. I told myself his growing distance was normal, just part of becoming independent. When he missed our weekly Sunday calls or forgot to return my texts, I made excuses. He's busy building his career, finding his way in the adult world, establishing himself among the Bayside Heights elite. His engagement to Jessica after 2 years at Reynolds & Associates wasn't a surprise. The dinner where they announced it, however, was revealing. Robert and Victoria Reynolds had arranged everything at Meridimo, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where a single entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. Of course, we'll handle all. The wedding arrangements, Victoria announced before I'd even had a chance to congratulate the couple. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've already spoken with the event coordinator at the Grand Harbor Hotel. They can accommodate us next June. That sounds wonderful, I said, trying to mask my dismay at being so cleanly removed from the planning process. I'd love to help. With anything you need. Victoria patted my hand as if I were a child offering to help with adult matters. That's sweet, Eleanor, but everything's under control. Jessica has very specific visions for her special day, and we have the resources to make them happen. I nodded, feeling the sting of her words. Beside me, David studied the wine list intently, avoiding my eyes. David's moving up quickly at the firm, Robert continued. I've got him managing the Westport Harbor development now. It's our most prestigious project to date. Dad, Jessica interjected with a tight smile. Mrs. Carter doesn't need to hear about all that. Oh, please call me Eleanor, I insisted for the 10th time. Mrs. Carter is probably more interested in hearing about the honeymoon, Jessica continued as if I hadn't spoken. We're thinking Bali or maybe the Maldives for 3 weeks. As they discussed 5-star resorts and private bungalows over water, I calculated how many extra hours I'd need to work to afford a decent mother-of-the-groom dress from a department store. Throughout dinner, David barely looked at me, laughing too loudly at Robert's jokes and reaching for Jessica's hand at every opportunity, as if to physically demonstrate his allegiance to his new family. When the check came, I reached for my purse, but Robert waved me off. Please, this is our treat, Victoria added with a tight smile. We know the real estate market has been challenging for smaller agents. I should have recognized then what was happening. David wasn't just growing up. He was erasing the parts of himself that connected to his humble beginnings. Preparing to join the Reynolds dynasty meant shedding the Carter history that had shaped him. In the months that followed, David became increasingly absent from my life. Our weekly calls dwindled to monthly, then to occasional texts. The wedding. Planning proceeded without my input. I received formal updates via email from Jessica's wedding coordinator. When I offered to host a small family dinner before the rehearsal, something modest but heartfelt in our old tradition, David gently declined. Jessica's parents have already arranged everything at the hotel, Mom. It's easier to keep everything in one place for the out-of-town guests. As the wedding approached, I found myself alone in my apartment, more conscious than ever of the empty space where David's laughter used to echo. I spent evenings looking through old photo albums. David blowing out birthday candles on homemade cakes. David proudly showing off his first architectural model at the high school science fair. David in his graduation cap with his arm around my shoulders. I wondered when he had stopped being that boy who promised to take care of me someday. The boy who wanted to build eco-friendly skyscrapers instead of luxury condos for the ultra-wealthy. During this time, something unexpected happened. A long-term investment property of mine, a modest 2-story house in a formerly overlooked neighborhood called Maple Grove, suddenly skyrocketed in value when the area became the new trendy location for young professionals. The tech company that had moved its headquarters nearby had transformed the sleepy suburb into a hot market virtually overnight. I had purchased the house 15 years earlier for a fraction of its current worth. After consulting with my financial advisor, I decided to sell. The profit was substantial, enough to completely change my financial situation. For the first time in decades, I had options. That same week, I received a call from an old colleague, Sophia Martinez, who had started her own boutique real estate firm specializing in historic property renovations. "Eleanor, I hear you just made a killing on that Maple Grove property," she said when I answered the phone. "I always said you had the best eye in the business for up-and-coming neighborhoods." We chatted for a while, catching up on years of industry changes and personal news. Then Sophia got to the point of her call. "I'm expanding the firm, and I need a partner who specializes in residential investment properties," she said. "Someone with experience spotting diamonds in the rough and the vision to transform them. I immediately thought of you." The offer was generous. A full partnership with profit sharing and a focus on the aspects of real estate I'd always loved most. It would mean longer hours and more responsibility, but also a return to the career path I'd reluctantly abandoned when David was young. "I don't know, Sophia," I hedged. "I've been doing small-scale local sales for so long." "Eleanor Carter, don't give me that," Sophia interrupted. "I've seen your portfolio. You've been playing small for years, but you've never lost your touch. Remember that Victorian on Elm Street everyone said was a money pit? You turned it into the most coveted address in the neighborhood." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment considering Sophia's offer and my unexpected windfall. I thought about David, about to marry into a family that viewed my career as insignificant, and about the approaching wedding where I would be little more than a well-dressed afterthought. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went property hunting for myself, not for clients or as an investment, but for a home that would reflect who I truly was. I found it in an elegant 1920s brownstone in Riverside, a neighborhood known for its creative community and independent businesses. The building needed work. The kitchen was outdated, the hardwood floors were scratched, and the plumbing would need to be entirely replaced. But the bones were magnificent. I could afford it now, barely. And I could see exactly what it could become with my expertise and some dedicated renovation work. By the end of the week, I had made an offer, which was accepted. I didn't tell David about any of it. Not the Maple Grove windfall, not Sophia's partnership offer, not the brownstone purchase. It wasn't a deliberate secret. It just never came up in our increasingly brief and superficial conversations. He was busy with work and wedding preparations, and I was suddenly occupied with plans of my own that didn't revolve around him for the first time in decades. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a call that would unexpectedly change everything. The caller ID showed David, and I answered immediately, surprised to hear from him midweek. "Mom, I need a favor," he said without preamble. "Jessica and I found the perfect house in Oakwood Estates, but there's a problem with the mortgage." Oakwood Estates was an exclusive gated community, far beyond what a young architect should be able to afford, even one working for his future father-in-law. "What kind of problem?" I asked cautiously. "The lender wants a larger down payment than we expected," David explained. "Jessica's parents are covering most of it, but we're still short. I was wondering if you might have some savings you could contribute." The request took me aback. In all our years together, through all our financial struggles, I had never asked David for money. Yet here he was, calling me after weeks of minimal contact to request funds for a house in a neighborhood where I could never afford to live. "How much are you short?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "50,000, he replied, as if it were a small sum. "I know it's a lot, but this house is perfect. 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a dedicated office space where I can work from home sometimes. Jessica's already planning the nursery, even though we're not expecting yet." "David, that's essentially my entire retirement fund," I said, quietly, not mentioning my recent windfall or the brownstone purchase. "I know, Mom, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. But Jessica has her heart set on this place, and you know how much family means to me. We want a home where our children can grow up with space and security." The implication was clear. My sacrifice was expected for the sake of my future grandchildren, for David's happiness, for the continuation of the pattern that had defined our relationship for 26 years. "I'll think about it," I promised, unwilling to commit or refuse outright. "Thanks, Mom. The closing is in 3 weeks, right after the wedding," he added. "Let me know as soon as possible." After we hung up, I sat in my half-packed apartment. I was preparing to move to the brownstone once renovations were complete, and felt an odd sense of clarity. For decades, I had put David's needs before my own, often to my detriment. I had defined my worth through his success and happiness. But something had shifted. Perhaps it was the brownstone purchase, or Sophia's partnership offer, or simply the accumulated weight of years of one-sided sacrifice. But I found myself unwilling to drain my finances for a house in a gated community that I would probably need an invitation to visit. I didn't immediately refuse. Instead, I did some research. Through industry connections, I discovered the house David and Jessica were purchasing was actually one of my former investment properties, a fact he either didn't know or chose not to mention. I had bought it during the recession when the previous owners faced foreclosure, renovated it extensively, and sold it 4 years ago at a modest profit when I needed funds for David's final year of college. The current sellers had made minimal improvements but were asking nearly double what I had sold it for, capitalizing on the neighborhood's increasing exclusivity. It was overpriced and would require significant work to justify the cost, but David and Jessica were apparently too enamored with the address to see the financial reality. This discovery crystallized something for me. I could contribute to a financially unsound decision to maintain my role as the supportive mother, or I could begin to relate to my son as an adult with professional expertise worth respecting. I called David the next day. "I've looked into the Oakwood Estates property," I said when he answered. "Great," he responded enthusiastically. "So you can help with the down payment?" "David, that house is severely overpriced for its condition," I explained. "The kitchen remodel was done with cheap materials. The roof will need replacing within 5 years, and the property taxes have increased 30% in the last 2 years alone." There was a pause on the line. "Jessica really loves it. Mom, the address is important for our social connections, and her parents think it's a good investment." "It's not," I said firmly, "and I won't contribute to a poor financial decision, even for you. What I will do is help you find a better property in a neighborhood with actual growth potential, where your money will work for you instead of draining your resources." "You don't understand." David's voice had cooled considerably. "This isn't about investment potential. It's about establishing ourselves in the right community. Jessica's parents agree with our choice." "I'm sure they do," I replied. "But I'm a real estate professional, David. This has been my career for over 20 years. I know what I'm talking about." "So you won't help us?" The disappointment in his voice was palpable. "Not with this particular house, no. But I'm happy to help you find something that makes more financial sense." "Forget it," he said shortly. "Jessica's parents will cover it." The call ended abruptly, and I was left feeling both guilty and oddly liberated. For perhaps the first time, I had related to David as a professional adult rather than just his accommodating mother. I expected several days of silence after our conversation. What I didn't expect was the invitation that arrived by email the following morning. "Change of holiday plans," read the subject line. David and Jessica had originally planned to spend Christmas with her family at their mountain chalet, leaving for their honeymoon the day after. The wedding was scheduled for December 21st, allowing just enough time for a brief holiday celebration before their departure for Bali on the 26th. "Mom," the email began, "Jessica's parents have decided to go on a cruise this Christmas, so we'll be spending the holiday at our new house. We'd love for you to join us for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day before we leave for our honeymoon. Let me know if you can make it. David." The invitation seemed like an olive branch, a chance to repair the tension from our previous conversation. Despite my misgivings about the house purchase, I was touched by the gesture. I quickly responded that I'd be delighted to join them, and asked what I could bring to contribute to the meal. "Just yourself," came the reply. "Jessica's handling everything." The wedding itself was a lavish affair at the Grand Harbor Hotel, with over 300 guests, a 7-tier cake, and floral arrangements that must have cost more than my first car. As mother of the groom, I was given a designated seat at the front, and a corsage, but otherwise might as well have been any other guest. Victoria Reynolds orchestrated every moment, from the seating arrangements to the timing of the toasts. I wore a simple but elegant navy dress I'd found at a high-end consignment shop, and to my surprise, received several compliments from other guests. One older gentleman, Victoria's uncle, I later discovered, even asked for my card after learning I was in real estate. "I've been looking for someone with knowledge of historic properties," he explained. "My wife and I are considering downsizing from our Bayside Heights mansion to something with more character." I provided my card, not mentioning that I was in the process of transitioning to Sophia's firm. Networking had become second nature over the years, even at my son's wedding where I felt like an afterthought. David and Jessica departed for their new house immediately after the reception, while I returned to my apartment to prepare for the Christmas visit. The snowstorm began late on December 23rd, blanketing the city in white. By Christmas Eve morning, travel advisories were in effect, but I was determined not to miss this opportunity to reconnect with David and see his new home. I packed my overnight bag with care, including the gifts I'd selected, a vintage architectural book for David that I'd found at a specialty shop, and a pair of hand-blown glass candlesticks for Jessica that had been more expensive than I'd typically spend but seemed appropriate for their new home. The drive to Oakwood Estates took 3 hours in the storm, more than twice the normal time. Night had fallen by the time I reached the gated community, and I had to provide identification to the security guard before being allowed to proceed to the address David had given me. The house was impressive from the outside, a substantial, colonial with a circular driveway and professional landscape lighting illuminating the snow-covered yard. Every window glowed warmly, and I could see an enormous Christmas tree through the front picture window. I parked behind David's car and Jessica's luxury SUV, gathering my bags and gifts before making my way carefully up the icy walkway. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open, revealing Jessica in a festive red dress, looking like she'd stepped out of a holiday magazine spread. "Mrs. Carter, you made it!" she exclaimed with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "We were getting worried about the roads. Please call me Eleanor," I reminded her as I stepped into the grand foyer. The drive was challenging, but I wouldn't miss Christmas with you and David. "Mom!" David appeared from what I assumed was the living room, giving me a quick hug. "Let me take your bags. We've got the guest room all ready for you." I followed them through the house, noting with my professional eye all the issues I'd identified in my research. The kitchen renovation that prioritized appearance over quality, the slight water damage in one corner of the dining room ceiling, the uneven heating that left the foyer significantly colder than the rest of the first floor. But I said nothing, complimenting instead the Christmas decorations and the spaciousness of the layout. This was not the time for property assessments. It was a chance to rebuild my relationship with my son. The evening passed pleasantly enough. We had dinner, a catered affair that Jessica had ordered from an upscale restaurant, and exchanged stories about the wedding and their plans for the house. David seemed genuinely happy, more relaxed than I'd seen him in months, proudly showing me every room and detailing their ideas for future improvements. "The primary suite has a fireplace and a sitting area," he explained as we toured the second floor. "And this will be the nursery eventually." He showed me a sunny corner room with a bay window. "And here's where you'll be staying." The guest room was lovely, with a queen-sized bed, elegant furnishings, and an ensuite bathroom. I set my overnight bag on the bed, touched that they'd given me such nice accommodations. We returned downstairs for coffee and dessert, and as the evening wound down, Jessica mentioned that her parents would be stopping by tomorrow after Christmas dinner, just for a few hours, she explained. They decided to cancel their cruise because of some business emergency, but they still want to see the house and exchange gifts. That's nice, I said automatically, though I wasn't particularly looking forward to spending Christmas with Victoria's judging eyes on me. We said our goodnights around 11, and I retreated to the guest room, tired from the long drive, but satisfied with how the evening had gone. I unpacked my small bag, placing my toiletries in the pristine bathroom and hanging my Christmas Day outfit in the closet. I was just settling into bed with a book when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. "Sorry, Mom. We need your room for Jessica's parents. You can sleep in the garage. There's a cot set up. Should be fine for a couple of nights." I stared at the message in disbelief, rereading it several times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But the meaning was unmistakable. After driving 3 hours through a snowstorm, after being shown to this room specially, I was being displaced. For the Reynolds, who had supposedly canceled their cruise but were now planning to stay overnight. I typed and deleted several responses before simply replying, "I see." Then I gathered my things, repacking my bag with methodical precision. I considered leaving immediately, driving back through the storm to my apartment, but the roads would be treacherous at this hour. As I carried my bag downstairs, I found David in the kitchen, getting a glass of water. "Mom," he looked startled. "I was going to tell you in the morning." "I think it's better that I know now," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Where exactly is this garage cot?" David had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Through that door and across the breezeway. There's a space heater set up and some extra blankets. It's not ideal, but Jessica's parents decided last minute to stay, and, well, they're used to certain accommodations." "And I'm not," I finished for him. "Don't worry, David. I understand completely." And I did understand, with a clarity that was almost painful. In the hierarchy of David's new life, I ranked below his in-laws' comfort, somewhere alongside household staff and distant acquaintances. The garage was exactly what you'd expect. A converted storage space with concrete floors and exposed insulation in some areas. The promised cot was there, along with a small space heater that barely took the edge off the December chill. A stack of musty-smelling blankets sat at the foot of the cot, clearly retrieved from long-term storage. I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the cot, fully dressed, including my coat. The situation was almost laughably symbolic. After decades of putting David first, of sacrificing my comfort for his, I was literally being put in the coldest, least hospitable part of his new life. As I sat there, I thought about the brownstone I was renovating, with its graceful architecture and abundant natural light. I thought about Sophia's partnership offer and the exciting projects we could tackle together. I thought about the life waiting for me beyond this garage, beyond the role of David's self-effacing mother. And then I thought about the house around me, the overpriced, poorly renovated property that David had been so desperate to purchase. The house I'd advised against buying. The house that had nearly resulted in him asking for my entire retirement savings. The house that, through a series of property transactions and holding company arrangements I'd established for tax purposes years ago, I technically owned. Not directly. The property had been purchased by Riverview Holdings, a small investment company I'd created during the recession to buy distressed properties anonymously, preventing seller bias in negotiations. I'd sold this particular house to the previous owners through Riverview, with a clause in the contract giving the holding company first right of refusal if they ever decided to sell. When they'd decided to move last year, I'd exercised that option through Riverview, then listed the house at market value. I hadn't been involved in the actual sale to David and Jessica. That had been handled by another agent at the firm where I worked. And I hadn't even realized they were the buyers until I'd researched the property after David's request for down payment funds. David had no idea that the mortgage payments he and Jessica were making ultimately flowed through to Riverview Holdings, and thus to me. That his grand symbolic purchase, his entry into the elite world of Oakwood Estates, was, in fact, financially benefiting the mother he'd relegated to sleeping in the garage. The irony wasn't lost on me as I arranged the musty blankets on the narrow cot. My son was unknowingly my tenant, making payments on a house I'd advised against buying, while treating me as if I were a burden to be accommodated as minimally as possible. As I finally lay down on the uncomfortable cot, still wrapped in my coat against the chill, I made a decision. Tomorrow, after the Reynolds had been suitably impressed by the house, after Christmas dinner had been served and gifts exchanged, I would tell David the truth. Not maliciously, not to embarrass him in front of his in-laws, but privately, honestly. About Riverview Holdings, about the brownstone, about Sophia's partnership offer, about the life I'd put on hold for decades and was finally reclaiming. It was time for both of us to see each other clearly, not as the self-sacrificing mother and the entitled son, but as two adults making choices about the kind of lives we wanted to live and the kind of relationship we wanted to have. As the space heater hummed ineffectively in the corner, I closed my eyes, oddly at peace despite the discomfort. Tomorrow would bring a necessary reckoning, but tonight, in this cold garage, I had finally found the clarity and resolve I'd been searching for. The eternally accommodating mother was gone. In her place was Eleanor Carter, real estate professional, future renovation expert, brownstone owner, and landlord to a son who had no idea how much was about to change. I woke before dawn in the garage, my back stiff from the narrow cot, the space heater having long since shut off. Outside, fresh snow had fallen through the night, muffling the world in pristine silence. I checked my phone. 5:47 a.m. on Christmas morning. No one would be stirring in the main house for hours. The day ahead loomed with its awkward formalities, forced cheerfulness, and the inevitable arrival of the Reynolds. I couldn't face it, not without coffee, not without some time to gather my thoughts. I packed my overnight bag quietly and slipped out to my car, brushing off the accumulated snow before sliding into the driver's seat. The engine protested briefly in the cold before rumbling to life. As I navigated the winding streets of Oakwood Estates, the security guard at the gate looked surprised to see someone leaving so early on Christmas morning, but waved me through without question. 20 minutes later, I found a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the Midnight Star, a chrome and neon throwback to a simpler era. Inside, a handful of patrons occupied booths, an elderly couple sharing sections of the newspaper, 2 truck drivers hunched over steaming plates, a young woman staring into her coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions I could only imagine. "Merry Christmas, honey," said the waitress, a woman about my age with tired eyes and a genuine smile. Her name tag identified her as Darlene. "What can I get you?" "Coffee, black, and whatever breakfast special you recommend," I replied, settling into a booth by the window. "The country skillet's good," she offered. "Potatoes, eggs, sausage, the works. Keeps you going all day." "Perfect." As Darlene retreated to place my order, I pulled out my phone and composed a text to David. "Went out for an early breakfast. We'll return for Christmas lunch." No mention of the garage accommodations, no hint of reproach. Just a simple statement of fact. His response came faster than I expected. "Okay, Jessica's parents arriving at noon. Lunch at 1. No, Merry Christmas. No, where are you? Just logistical information." I put my phone away as Darlene returned with coffee and silverware wrapped in a paper napkin. "You don't look like our usual Christmas morning crowd," she observed, filling my cup with steaming dark liquid. "Everything all right?" I considered brushing off her question with a polite non-answer, but something in her kind, tired eyes invited honesty. "My son asked me to sleep in his garage last night to make room for his in-laws," I found myself saying. "I drove 3 hours through a snowstorm for the privilege." Darlene's eyebrows rose. "That's cold in more ways than one," she said, refilling the coffee cup I'd already half emptied. "This one's on the house." "The irony is," I continued, uncertain why I was confiding in a stranger. I technically own the house, through an investment company he doesn't know about. Darlene let out a low whistle. Now, that's what I call a plot twist. What are you going to do about it? I'm not sure, I admitted. Tell him the truth, I suppose. After his in-laws leave. I'd pay good money to see that conversation, she said with a wry smile. My son moved to Phoenix 5 years ago. Calls on my birthday and Christmas, sends gifts for the grandkids I'm supposedly babysitting. But showing up, that's too much effort. We shared a moment of mutual understanding. Two mothers who had given everything only to find themselves pushed to the periphery of their children's lives. My advice, Darlene said as she placed my country skillet before me, the plate piled high with home fries, scrambled eggs, and sausage links. Whatever you decide, do it for you, not to teach him a lesson. Kids rarely learn the lessons we think. We're teaching anyway. Her words stayed with me as I ate, watching the sky lighten to a pearl gray through the diner window. By the time I'd finished breakfast and nursed a third cup of coffee, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't confront David today after all. Christmas, with his in-laws present, wasn't the right time for revelations that might embarrass him or cause a scene. Instead, I would observe. I would witness how David interacted with the Reynolds, how he had shaped himself to fit their expectations, what remained of the boy I'd raised, and what had been discarded in his pursuit of acceptance. And I would begin planning the conversation we needed to have, not about Riverview Holdings or property ownership, but about respect, about remembering our shared history, about finding a way forward that honored both his new life and the relationship that had sustained us for 26 years. At 11:30, I returned to the house in Oakwood Estates, this time parking on the street rather than in the driveway, which was now occupied by a gleaming luxury sedan that I assumed belonged to the Reynolds. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my overnight bag, which I'd never unpacked, and the carefully wrapped Christmas gifts, and approached the front door. Jessica answered my knock, looking slightly harried despite her perfect makeup and festive green dress. Eleanor, there you are. Come in, come in. My parents just arrived early. Her emphasis on early suggested this had disrupted her carefully laid plans. I hope that's not a problem, I said, stepping into the foyer where the temperature seemed even chillier than the previous evening. No, of course not, she assured me, though her tight smile suggested otherwise. David's showing them around, upstairs. Why don't you put your things in the, guest space and join us in the living room for aperitifs before lunch? The guest space? She couldn't even bring herself to say garage. I simply nodded and made my way through the house and out to the garage, where the cot looked even more dismal in the harsh daylight. I set my bag on it, removed the gifts to bring inside, and took a moment to straighten my clothes and check my appearance in the small mirror I'd brought. The woman who looked back at me seemed different somehow, more determined perhaps, less willing to fade into the background. I applied fresh lipstick, squared my shoulders, and returned to the main house. In the living room, the Reynolds were perched on the sofa like visiting royalty, while David bustled about serving drinks. Victoria Reynolds, impeccably dressed in a cashmere turtleneck and wool trousers, her silver blonde hair arranged in an elegant updo, was critiquing the Christmas tree decorations. The ribbon should cascade, darling, not just wrap around. We'll have to fix that before next year. And those glass ornaments clash with the overall silver theme. You should consider a more cohesive approach. Robert Reynolds, tall and distinguished, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to deference, was examining the crown molding with a slight frown. You'll want to check these corners for separation, David. Settling issues can start there. Of course, Robert, David was saying, handing him a crystal tumbler of what appeared to be expensive scotch. I've scheduled an inspection in January to address any structural concerns. Mom, David spotted me hovering in the doorway. Come in, join us. You remember Victoria and Robert. 3 heads turned in my direction, and I felt myself being assessed through 3 different lenses. Jessica's barely concealed impatience, Victoria's cool appraisal, and Robert's vague recognition. "Of course," I said, stepping forward with a warm smile. "Lovely to see you again. Merry Christmas." Victoria extended her hand as if offering a royal favor. "Eleanor, how nice. We didn't expect to see you today. Didn't Jessica mention we'd be staying over?" "A last-minute change of plans," I replied smoothly. "But it worked out beautifully. I had a delightful early breakfast at the Midnight Star. Have you been? It's quite the local institution." The expression on Victoria's face suggested I'd mentioned dining at a gas station. "I can't say we frequent diners," she said. "But how?" "Quaint." "What can I get you to drink, Mom?" David interjected, clearly anxious to move past this awkward exchange. "White wine would be lovely if you have it." As David poured, I took the opportunity to greet Robert more directly. "I understand. Congratulations are in order on the Westport Harbor development. David mentioned you've put him in charge of the project." Robert seemed surprised that I was familiar with his business dealings. "Yes, it's our most ambitious undertaking to date. Nearly $1 billion in mixed-use development. David's handling the residential component." "A significant responsibility," I observed. But then, David has always had an excellent eye for residential potential, even as a child. He could spot the best properties when we'd tour open houses together on weekends. David returned with my wine, a flash of nostalgia crossing his face at the memory of our Sunday afternoon adventures. "Mom used to explain architectural elements to me before I could even reach doorknobs," he said with a small laugh. "I could identify Victorian from craftsman by first grade." "How industrious," Victoria commented, though her tone suggested she found it odd rather than impressive. Jessica emerged from the kitchen, saving us from further awkwardness. "Lunch is ready," she announced. "I hope everyone's hungry." The caterer prepared a traditional Christmas spread. We moved to the dining room, where the table had been expertly set with fine china and crystal. The caterer had indeed produced an impressive feast. A perfectly roasted turkey, cranberry sauce, multiple vegetable dishes, fresh rolls, and 3 different kinds of potato preparations. "Everything looks wonderful," I said as we took our seats, noting that I'd been placed at the far end of the table, as distant from David as possible without actually being in another room. "Jessica has quite the talent for entertaining," Victoria said proudly. "She learned from the best, of course. I've hosted the governor's Christmas dinner 3 years running." "I'm sure she did," I agreed pleasantly. David always said she had impeccable taste. The meal progressed with conversation dominated by the Reynolds, stories of their social connections, the challenges of maintaining multiple properties, the exclusive schools they were considering for future grandchildren. David contributed occasionally, always careful to align his comments with his in-laws' perspectives. Jessica smiled and nodded, the perfect hostess and daughter. I observed it all with increasing clarity. My son, so eager for approval, had learned to play a part, to suppress aspects of himself that didn't fit the Reynolds narrative. The boy who had once dreamed of eco-friendly skyscrapers now discussed the marble countertop upgrades planned for luxury condominiums as if they were revolutionary design elements. Midway through the main course, Robert turned his attention to me. "Eleanor, Jessica mentioned you work in real estate as well. Small residential properties, is it?" "I've specialized in residential sales and investment properties for about 20 years, I confirmed, deliberately keeping my answer vague. "Though I'm transitioning to a new focus on historic renovation with a boutique firm." "Oh." This seemed to pique his interest. "Which firm?" "Martinez Restoration and Development," I replied, using the formal name of Sophia's company. "We'll be focusing on signature properties in established neighborhoods, particularly historic districts." David looked up, surprised. "You're changing firms? You never mentioned that." It's a recent development, I said simply. Sophia Martinez approached me a few weeks ago with a partnership offer. A partnership? Jessica's tone suggested she found this hard to believe. In restoration work? Isn't that rather specialized? Very much so, I agreed. That's what makes it so exciting. My first project will actually be my new home, a 1920s brownstone in Riverside that I purchased last month. The table fell silent. David stared at me, fork suspended midway to his mouth. You bought a brownstone? In Riverside? But that's an up-and-coming area with significant investment potential, I finished for him. The property needs extensive renovation, but the bones are magnificent. Original hardwood floors, crown molding, beveled glass windows. It just needs someone with vision to restore it to its former glory. But your apartment, David said, still processing this information. You've lived there for years. Change can be invigorating, I replied with a small smile. I've always loved historic architecture, and now I have the opportunity to preserve a piece of it while creating exactly the home I want. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Riverside is becoming quite fashionable, I hear. Some of those brownstones command impressive prices, even unrenovated. They do, I acknowledged. Fortunately, my investment in a property in Maple Grove paid off handsomely when I sold it earlier this year. The neighborhood underwent quite a transformation when Nexus Technologies moved their headquarters nearby. Now Robert was fully engaged. The Maple Grove Tech Corridor has seen remarkable appreciation. When did you acquire the property? About 15 years ago, I said. Long before anyone anticipated the area's development potential. Sometimes patience is the best investment strategy. The conversation had shifted, I realized. The Reynolds were reassessing me, no longer viewing me as David's modest middle-class mother, but as someone with unexpected financial acumen. Even, David was looking at me differently, confusion and a hint of respect mingling in his expression. Mom never mentioned any of this, he said, almost to himself. There's been little opportunity lately, I replied gently, without accusation. We've all been busy with our own projects. A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly suppressed as Jessica redirected the conversation to their honeymoon plans. The moment had passed, but something had shifted. The careful hierarchy established by the Reynolds and accepted by David had been disrupted by the revelation that I wasn't quite who they had assumed me to be. After lunch, we exchanged gifts in the living room. The Reynolds presented David and Jessica with a set of keys to a beachfront condo in Florida. Just a little pied-à-terre for weekend getaways, Victoria explained, while David and Jessica gave them an elaborate gift basket of gourmet foods and fine wines. When it came time for my gifts, I handed the carefully wrapped packages to David and Jessica with a sense of both anticipation and resignation. In light of the grand gestures from the Reynolds, my offerings would seem modest indeed. David unwrapped the vintage architectural book first, his expression transforming as he recognized the rare volume. Falling Water, the making of a masterpiece, he breathed, running his fingers over the embossed cover. This is a first edition. How did you find this? I have my sources, I said with a smile, remembering the weeks spent tracking it down through specialty bookshops. Open it. He turned to the title page, where Frank Lloyd Wright's signature was inscribed along with a small sketch. David looked up, eyes wide. This is authentic? It must have cost... He stopped himself, realizing the implication of his words. It's authentic, I confirmed. And worth every penny to see your face right now. Jessica opened her gift next, the hand-blown glass candlesticks gleaming in the afternoon light. These are lovely, she said, with what seemed like genuine appreciation. They'll look perfect on the dining room table. They're from a small glassworks in Vermont, I explained. Each piece is unique, created by an artisan who's been practicing his craft for over 40 years. Victoria examined the candlesticks with newfound interest. Artisanal pieces are becoming quite collectible. These have a wonderful organic quality. David and Jessica had gifted me a department store gift card, impersonal but generous in amount, accompanied by a scented candle set. "We weren't sure what you might need," Jessica explained, the subtext clear. "We don't really know you or your tastes." "It's perfect," I assured them. "Especially with the new house. There will be plenty to furnish." After gifts, Robert suggested a tour of the property, keen to assess the structural elements I'd mentioned earlier. As we moved through the house, I noticed him paying particular attention to the issues I'd identified during my professional evaluation. The roof that would need replacing, the kitchen's cosmetic upgrades hiding substandard materials, the irregular heating system. "You're right about the roof," he murmured to me when the others were distracted by Victoria's critique of the primary bathroom fixtures. 5 years at most, and that kitchen renovation is all show, no substance. "The previous owners prioritized aesthetics over quality," I agreed quietly, a common mistake when preparing to sell. Robert gave me a shrewd look. "You've got a good eye, Eleanor, better than I anticipated." The comment was both compliment and admission. He had underestimated me, as had his daughter and wife, as, perhaps, had my own son. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself engaged in increasingly detailed conversations with Robert about real estate markets and investment strategies, while Victoria contributed occasional observations about design trends and neighborhood prestige. David hovered nearby, clearly surprised by this unexpected rapport between his mother and his father-in-law. Around 4 o'clock, Jessica announced it was time to prepare for Christmas dinner, though none of us were particularly hungry after the substantial lunch. As she disappeared into the kitchen, David pulled me aside in the hallway. "Mom, when were you going to tell me about the brownstone? And the partnership with this Martinez firm? And the Maple Grove property? That's a lot of major life changes." There was hurt in his voice, alongside confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. I considered my response carefully. "When would have been a good time, David?" I asked gently. "Between wedding preparations and your new job responsibilities, our conversations have been limited lately. And when we have spoken, the focus has been on your life, your changes, your exciting new developments." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I've been busy, but that's no excuse. I should have asked about your life too." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture from childhood that emerged when he was distressed. "And now I've stuck you in the garage for Christmas." "God, Mom, I'm sorry. That was inexcusable." "It was revealing," I corrected him, "about where I stand in your list of priorities." The words hung between us, uncomfortable, but honest. Before David could respond, Jessica called from the kitchen, requesting his help with something. He hesitated, torn between obligations. "Go," I said. "We can continue this conversation later." He nodded, relieved and regretful in equal measure, before hurrying off to assist his wife. I retreated to the living room, where Robert was examining the bookshelves with interest. "Your son has an impressive collection of architectural volumes," he observed as I entered, "though they don't appear to have been opened recently." "David always had eclectic tastes," I replied, running my fingers along the spines of books I had gifted him over the years. "Sometimes interests evolve as we grow. Or as we adapt to our circumstances," Robert suggested, giving me a pointed look. Victoria and I have watched many young people reshape themselves to fit the Bayside Heights expectations, some more successfully than others. The observation was surprisingly candid. "And David, how would you assess his adaptation?" Robert considered the question, swirling the remnants of scotch in his glass. "He's eager to please, perhaps too eager. Jessica has always been drawn to what she can't quite have. The chase, the challenge. Once conquered, her interest tends to wane. The assessment was brutally honest, more so than I had expected from a man protecting his daughter's interests. That doesn't bode well for a long-term marriage, I observed carefully. Perhaps not, he acknowledged. But they're young. They'll either grow together or grow apart. The question is whether David will still recognize himself at the end of either process. Our conversation was interrupted by Victoria's return from upstairs, where she had been examining the guest bedroom that was now prepared for her and Robert instead of me. "The linens are adequate," she announced, making it clear that adequate was barely acceptable. "Though I'll have Jessica order that Egyptian cotton set I mentioned for future visits." Christmas dinner was a subdued affair compared to lunch. With everyone slightly overfull and conversation lagging, Jessica maintained her perfect hostess demeanor, but I could sense tension beneath the surface, particularly when David mentioned we might visit my new brownstone together once renovations were underway. Of course, we'd have to coordinate schedules. Jessica interjected quickly. "We have the Westport Harbor project, the Andersons' dinner party, the charity gala planning committee." "I'm sure we can find an afternoon somewhere in there," David said mildly, surprising me with this small assertion of independence. After dinner, as we gathered again in the living room for coffee and dessert, Victoria turned the conversation to their summer plans. "We're thinking of renting a villa in Tuscany for August," she told Jessica. "You and David must join us for at least 2 weeks. The Harringtons will be nearby with their yacht, and the Bennetts are hosting a series of dinner parties at their estate in Florence." "That sounds wonderful," Jessica enthused. "Doesn't it, David?" David nodded, but I noticed he seemed less excited than his wife. "When would we need to commit?" he asked. "I should check the project timeline for Westport Harbor." "Oh, Robert can arrange coverage," Victoria said dismissively. "Family holidays take precedence over work obligations." I observed this exchange with interest, noting the subtle way the Reynolds asserted control over not just social plans, but professional responsibilities as well. David's life was being scheduled, shaped, and directed according to their expectations, with little room for his own preferences or priorities. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria and Robert announced they were retiring for the night, tired from their unexpected change of holiday plans. Jessica escorted them upstairs to the guest bedroom, my former accommodation, while David and I remained in the living room. "You can have my office," he said abruptly. "For tonight. There's a pull-out sofa. It's not great, but it's better than the garage. I should have offered it yesterday." "Thank you," I said, accepting both the offer and the implicit apology. "That would be much appreciated." David fidgeted with his coffee cup, clearly wanting to say more but unsure how to begin. "Mom, about the brownstone and everything else, I'm glad for you, really. It's just a lot to take in." "I understand," I assured him. "Change can be disorienting, especially when it comes from unexpected directions." "Yeah," he agreed with a rueful smile. "Like discovering your mother is secretly a real estate mogul with a brownstone and a new career partnership." "Hardly a mogul," I corrected him, "but perhaps more financially astute than you've given me credit for." He had the grace to look chastened. "Robert was impressed by you. I could tell. He doesn't impress easily." "Robert is an intelligent businessman," I acknowledged. "He recognizes competence when he sees it, regardless of the package it comes in." A silence fell between us, more comfortable than earlier tensions, but still weighted with unspoken thoughts. Finally, David spoke again, his voice softer, more reminiscent of the boy I'd raised. "Remember when we used to drive around on Sundays looking at houses? You'd point out features I'd never have noticed. The way light fell through windows at different times of day, the flow of rooms, the quality of materials. You taught me to see beyond the surface." "I remember," I said, touched that he recalled those days with fondness. You were an eager student. I think I've forgotten some of those lessons, he admitted, staring into his coffee. Gotten caught up in appearances, in what things represent rather than what they are. It was a moment of self-awareness I hadn't expected, a glimpse of the thoughtful young man beneath the ambitious professional facade he'd constructed. It's not too late to remember, I told him gently. He looked up, a question in his eyes that he couldn't quite articulate. Before he could find the words, Jessica returned from settling her parents. They're comfortable now, she announced, displeasure evident in her tone despite her attempt to hide it. Mother says the mattress is firmer than she prefers, but she'll manage for one night. The spell was broken. David's momentary vulnerability receded, replaced by the dutiful son-in-law concerned with Victoria's comfort. Maybe we could add a mattress topper, he suggested, for future visits. Jessica brightened at his solution. Perfect idea. I'll order one tomorrow. She turned to me, clearly an afterthought. Eleanor, I hope you'll be comfortable in David's office. It's small, but the sofa pulls out. There are extra blankets in the closet. I'm sure it will be fine, I assured her, rising from my seat. It's been a long day. I think I'll turn in now. David stood as well, suddenly awkward. I'll show you to the office and help set up the sofa bed. We said goodnight to Jessica, who was already making notes on her phone about mattress toppers and Egyptian cotton sheets, and walked down the hall to a small room that had been converted into a home office. A desk dominated one wall, with bookshelves, above it holding architectural references and business manuals. The promised sofa occupied the opposite wall, its leather surface showing minimal signs of use. David pulled it out, revealing a thin mattress with deep creases from being folded away. He found sheets and blankets in the closet, and together, we made up the bed in silence, the familiar domestic activity reminiscent of countless shared tasks over the years. There should be towels in the hall bathroom, he said, stepping back to survey our handiwork. And help yourself to anything you need from the kitchen. Thank you, I said, sitting on the edge of the now-prepared sofa bed. I'll be fine. You should get some rest, too. It's been an eventful Christmas. He hovered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say more but constrained by the circumstances and perhaps by habits of emotional distance that had developed between us. Good night, Mom, he said finally, and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, David, I replied softly. After he left, closing the door behind him, I sat motionless on the edge of the sofa bed, processing the day's revelations. Not just my disclosures about the brownstone and the partnership, but my observations of David's new life and the influences shaping it. I thought about Robert's candid assessment of Jessica's character, about Victoria's relentless standards, about David's brief moment of self-awareness in the living room. Most of all, I thought about the decision I needed to make, whether to tell David about Riverview Holdings and his unknowing status as my tenant. It would be easy enough to maintain the status quo, to continue collecting his mortgage payments through the holding company while keeping our financial connection private. Revealing the truth would complicate our already strained relationship and potentially embarrass him deeply, especially in front of the Reynolds. But secrets had a way of surfacing eventually. And our relationship, if it was to heal and evolve, needed to be based on honesty, however uncomfortable. As I finally lay down on the narrow sofa bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of my son's home office, I resolved to have the conversation with David after the holidays, when we could speak, privately and without the pressure of Christmas expectations or in-law observations, not to shame him or assert dominance, but to clear the air between us, to establish a new foundation based on mutual respect and recognition. The woman who had slept in her son's garage on Christmas Eve was not the same woman preparing for sleep in his office on Christmas night. Something fundamental had shifted in me, a reclaiming of my identity, a refusal to be diminished or marginalized, a determination to be seen and acknowledged for who I truly was, in all my complexity. Tomorrow, I would leave early, sparing everyone the awkwardness of prolonged goodbyes. David and Jessica would depart for their honeymoon, and the Reynolds would return to their Bayside Heights mansion, and I would begin the next chapter of my life in earnest, renovating the brownstone, partnering with Sophia, reshaping my relationship with my son on more equal terms. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself looking forward to the future with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. Whatever happened with David, whatever became of his marriage to Jessica and his connection to the Reynolds, I would be all right, more than all right. I would be Eleanor Carter, making choices for herself rather than sacrificing for others, creating the life she wanted rather than accommodating the lives others expected her to lead. The garage had been a turning point, not a destination. And for that unexpected gift of clarity, I was strangely grateful. The January morning dawned crisp and cold as I pulled up to the brownstone in Riverside. Renovation crews were already unloading equipment from vans parked along the street, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. My brownstone, the phrase still sent a thrill through me, stood tall and proud among its neighbors, its weathered brick facade hinting at stories from another era. "Morning, Ms. Carter," called Marco, the project foreman, as I approached with a tray of coffee cups. "You're early today." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, handing him a steaming cup. "Too many ideas for the third-floor study." Marco accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Those original blueprints you found are a game changer. We can restore the original archways now that we know exactly where they were." I smiled, remembering the excitement of discovering the blueprints tucked away in the city archives. This connection to the building's history had felt like a personal gift, a validation of my decision to save this piece of architectural heritage. The past 3 weeks since Christmas had been a whirlwind of activity, finalizing plans with contractors, selecting materials, obtaining permits, and preparing for my official partnership announcement with Sophia at Martinez Restoration and Development. David and Jessica had left for their honeymoon in Bali the day after Christmas, scheduled to return today. We hadn't spoken since that awkward holiday gathering, though he had sent a few generic honeymoon photos and brief texts. The conversation we needed to have about Riverview Holdings loomed on the horizon, but I had used the intervening weeks productively, focusing on building my new life rather than dwelling on complications from the old one. "Let me show you what we found when we opened up that wall on the second floor," Marco said, guiding me into the house where temporary lighting illuminated stripped-down rooms and exposed structural elements. The air smelled of plaster dust and possibility. As we toured the progress, discussing load-bearing walls and plumbing upgrades, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. David's name flashed on the screen. "Excuse me," I told Marco. "I need to take this." I stepped into what would eventually be the sunlit kitchen, now just framed walls and electrical rough-ins. "David, hello. Are you back from Bali?" "Landed last night," he confirmed, sounding tired but refreshed. "The time difference is brutal, but the trip was amazing. Listen, Mom, I was hoping we could get together soon. There's something I want to talk to you about." My pulse quickened. Had he somehow discovered the truth about Riverview Holdings? "Of course," I said carefully. "I'm actually at the brownstone right now, overseeing renovation work. Would you like to see it? We could talk here." A pause on the line. "That would be... yeah, I'd like that. How about tomorrow afternoon? Jessica has plans with her mother to discuss some interior design project." "Tomorrow works perfectly. Say 2 o'clock? The address is 427 Sycamore Street in Riverside." After we disconnected, I stood for a moment in the empty space that would become my kitchen, considering the implications of David's call. His tone had been difficult to read, neither accusatory nor particularly warm, just purposeful. Whatever he wanted to discuss seemed important to him. I returned to work with the renovation team, pushing thoughts of tomorrow's meeting to the background as we tackled immediate decisions about tile selections and cabinet configurations. By late afternoon, I was covered in dust but satisfied with the day's progress. The brownstone was slowly revealing its potential, shedding decades of neglect to expose the elegant bones beneath. That evening, alone in my apartment with boxes, half-packed for my eventual move, I pulled out the Riverview Holdings documents. The paperwork confirming my ownership of David and Jessica's house was straightforward, a chain of property transfers and holding. Company registrations that would be transparent to anyone with knowledge of real estate transactions, yet completely opaque to casual observers. I had acquired the Oakwood Estates property 5 years ago when the original developer faced bankruptcy. Through Riverview, I had purchased several properties in the development at substantially reduced prices, intending to hold them until the market recovered. Most had been sold over the intervening years as values rose, but I had retained this particular house because of its excellent location on a corner lot with mature trees. When David had mentioned looking in Oakwood Estates, I hadn't immediately connected it to my Riverview property. The sale had been handled by another agent at my firm while I was focused on David's wedding preparations. It wasn't until he asked for the down payment assistance that I had researched the property and discovered the connection. Now, reviewing the documentation, I contemplated how to explain this to David without making him feel manipulated or deceived. The truth was, I hadn't intentionally kept this information from him. It simply hadn't seemed relevant until the garage incident forced me to reevaluate our relationship and the boundaries I had allowed him to cross. The next morning, I arrived at the brownstone early, giving the renovation crew specific instructions to take their lunch break during David's visit to allow us privacy. Then I spent an hour walking through each room, envisioning the finished spaces and considering how to present this evolving project to my son. At precisely 2 p.m., a sleek car pulled up outside. I watched from the front window as David emerged, looking tanned from his honeymoon and slightly out of place in his expensive suit amid the construction equipment. He studied the brownstone's facade with professional interest before approaching the front steps. I met him at the door, acutely aware of my casual clothes and the dust in my hair. "Welcome to my construction zone," I said, opening the door wider to admit him. "Mom," he greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "This is impressive. The scale of it is much larger than I'd imagined." 4 stories, including the garden level, I confirmed, leading him into the entry hall where original mosaic floor tiles were being painstakingly restored. It was subdivided into apartments in the 1950s, but we're converting it back to a single-family home with some modern updates. "We?" David inquired, following me through the space. "Myself and the renovation team from Martinez Restoration," I explained. "Sophia and I finalized our partnership agreement last week. The brownstone will serve as both my home and a showcase property for potential clients." David nodded, absorbing this information as he ran a professional eye over the exposed beams and partially demolished walls. "The bones are excellent," he acknowledged. "These ceiling heights are incredible for a building of this era." "That's what attracted me initially," I said, pleased by his appreciation of the architectural details. "That and the south-facing garden. Let me show you the back of the house." We moved through the main floor, stepping carefully around construction materials and equipment. I pointed out original features we were preserving: intricate crown molding, pocket doors, stained glass transoms, and areas where we were making contemporary interventions to accommodate modern living. David listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that revealed his architectural training. This was the most engaged conversation we'd had in months, perhaps years. A dialogue between 2 adults with shared knowledge rather than the stilted small talk that had characterized our recent interactions. "The garden level will have a separate entrance," I explained as we descended the stairs. "I'm considering making it a short-term rental or possibly an office for the business. The zoning allows for mixed use." "Smart," David said, creates additional income while maintaining privacy for the main living spaces. We emerged into the garden, a currently overgrown space with enormous potential. Even in winter, it was possible to envision what it would become with proper landscaping and care. A private urban oasis surrounded by mature trees and historic brick walls. "This is extraordinary, Mom," David said, turning to face me. "I had no idea you were undertaking something so ambitious. The scope of this renovation is significant." "Life is too short for small dreams," I replied, quoting something his father had once said before gambling destroyed our marriage. "Would you like some coffee? I've set up a makeshift break room upstairs." In what would eventually be my study, I had arranged 2 folding chairs and a small table near a window overlooking the garden. A thermos of coffee and 2 mugs waited, along with a plate of cookies from the bakery down the street. As we settled into this improvised meeting space, I decided to address the purpose of David's visit directly. "You mentioned wanting to talk. About something?" I prompted, pouring coffee into the mismatched mugs. David accepted his cup, staring into it rather than meeting my eyes. "Yes, it's about the house in Oakwood Estates." My heart beat faster. Did he know? What about it? After we returned from the honeymoon, there was a letter waiting from the property management company. He looked up now, his expression troubled. Apparently, the company that holds our mortgage is called Riverview Holdings. They're conducting an inspection next month as part of some portfolio review. I maintained a neutral expression, waiting for him to continue. "The thing is," David said, setting down his coffee, "I did some research on Riverview Holdings. It's a small investment company that specializes in buying distressed properties and holding them for appreciation. Very little information is publicly available about ownership or management. Many investment companies maintain privacy for their principals," I observed carefully. "True," he acknowledged, "but something about the name seemed familiar, so I looked through some old papers, and I found this." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a faded birthday card, a construction paper creation from his elementary school days, featuring a crayon drawing of a riverside house with a tree. Inside, in childish script, were the words, "Happy birthday, Mom. One day I will build you a house by a river. Love, David." I remembered that card. He had made it for my 35th birthday, the year after his father left. I had kept it in my keepsake box for years, though I couldn't recall when I had last seen it. "You used to call me your Riverview when I was little," David said quietly, "because you said looking at me was like watching a river, always changing but always the same at heart." The nickname had been forgotten for decades, buried beneath layers of more immediate concerns and evolving relationships. Hearing it now, in this context, brought a lump to my throat. "Riverview Holdings," David continued, his voice steadier now. "A company that just happens to own the house Jessica and I purchased. A company with a name that has personal significance. To you?" He met my eyes directly. "Mom, are you Riverview Holdings?" The moment had arrived sooner than I had anticipated, and from an unexpected direction. I took a deep breath, weighing my response carefully. Denial would be pointless and dishonest. The time for transparency had come. "Yes," I confirmed. "Riverview Holdings is my investment company. I established it during the recession to purchase properties anonymously, preventing seller bias in negotiations." David's expression remained carefully controlled. "So you're our landlord. You own the house we're living in, the house we believe we're buying." "Technically, you are buying it," I clarified. "The mortgage is legitimate, and ownership will transfer fully to you upon completion of payments. Riverview Holdings is the lender, not the permanent owner." "But the monthly payments go to you," he pressed. "And you knew this when I asked for help with the down payment." I nodded, accepting the implicit accusation. "I didn't make the connection initially," When you mentioned looking in Oakwood Estates, I didn't immediately realize you were purchasing one of my Riverview properties. The sale was handled by another agent at my firm while I was focused on your wedding preparations. It wasn't until you asked for financial assistance that I researched the property and discovered the connection. And you didn't think this was relevant information to share? David's voice had an edge now, though he was clearly working to maintain composure. By then, our relationship had become distant, I said carefully. You were immersed in wedding plans and your new connection to the Reynolds family. Our conversations were infrequent and superficial. And frankly, after I advised against purchasing that particular house due to its condition and overvaluation, only to have you dismiss my professional assessment, I didn't feel obligated to volunteer the information. David flinched slightly at the reminder of how he had rejected my expertise. And Christmas? He asked. When you were sleeping in the garage of a house you own. The irony hadn't been lost on me, then or now. That was certainly a clarifying moment, I acknowledged. It made me realize how profoundly our relationship had changed, how little regard you seemed to have for me as either your mother or a professional in my field. A flush crept up David's neck. I handled that badly, he admitted. Jessica's parents, their expectations. It created pressure that I managed poorly. You relegated me to the garage without discussion or apology, I stated plainly. In a house that I technically own. If there's a metaphor for how our relationship has evolved, that might be it. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture from childhood that emerged when he was distressed. I can't believe this. All this time we've been making mortgage payments to you. You could have foreclosed or raised the interest rate or… I would never do that, I interrupted firmly. Despite recent tensions, you're my son. I've always looked out for your interests, even when you weren't aware of it. But you let me ask you for down payment money for a house you already owned, he countered, struggling to reconcile the deception. You let me believe we needed the Reynolds' financial support to secure the property. I declined to contribute. To a financial decision I considered unwise, I corrected him. The house is severely overpriced for its condition. The roof will need replacing within 5 years. The kitchen remodel was done with cheap materials. The property taxes have increased 30% in the last 2 years alone. I told you all of this. But you were more concerned with the address and Jessica's preferences than sound financial planning. David's expression shifted as he processed these intersecting realities. His dismissal of my professional advice, his request for financial assistance with a property I already controlled, the painful irony of my garage accommodations. Does Jessica know? He asked finally. No, I assured him. I haven't discussed this with anyone except you. He nodded, relieved at least about that aspect of the situation. What happens now? With the mortgage? With Riverview Holdings? Nothing changes with your mortgage terms, I said. You'll continue paying as agreed. The inspection mentioned in the letter is standard procedure. I conduct them annually for all Riverview properties. It allows me to identify maintenance issues before they become major problems. And if we wanted to get a different mortgage, to sever this financial connection? The question stung, though I understood its origin. You're free to refinance with another lender at any time, I told him. Though current interest rates are significantly higher than what you have with Riverview. David fell silent, gazing out the window at the winter garden below. I gave him space to process, sipping my coffee and waiting for his next question, or accusation. The renovation crew would return from lunch soon, ending our privacy. I don't know how to feel about this, he finally said. Part of me is angry about the deception. Another part is embarrassed about how I treated you at Christmas, especially knowing what I know now. And there's a part that's just confused about who you are. The mother I thought I knew wouldn't have created investment companies or purchased brownstones for major renovations. Perhaps you never really knew me, I suggested gently. Or perhaps you knew a version of me that existed primarily in relation to you and your needs. Eleanor the mother, not Eleanor the woman with her own ambitions and capabilities. He looked up sharply. That's not fair. I know you sacrificed for me, but that doesn't mean I saw you as one-dimensional. Doesn't it? I challenged. When was the last time you asked about my work before Christmas dinner with the Reynolds? When did you last inquire about my goals or dreams or interests that didn't directly involve you? David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, recognition dawning in his eyes. I can't remember, he admitted after a moment. Not recently. Not for years, maybe. Exactly, I said without accusation, simply stating a fact. After your father left, I focused entirely on providing stability and opportunities for you. That was my choice, and I don't regret it. But somewhere along the way, that role became the entirety of how you saw me. A support system, a safety net, a background presence in your life story, rather than a person with my own narrative. And now you're reclaiming that narrative, David said slowly, looking around at the brownstone renovation in progress. The partnership with Martinez, this property, revealing yourself as Riverview Holdings, it's all part of stepping out of the background. Yes, I confirmed, pleased by his understanding despite the difficult circumstances. It's about remembering who I am beyond being David's mom, as wonderful as that role has been. The front door opened downstairs, signaling the return of the renovation crew. Our private conversation was drawing to a close, though we had only begun to address the complexities of our situation. David stood, straightening his jacket in a gesture that reminded me painfully of his father, a physical reset when emotions threatened to overwhelm. I need time to process all this, he said, to figure out what it means for me and Jessica, for our relationship with you going forward. I understand, I replied, rising as well. Take whatever time you need. My door is always open to you, whether in this brownstone or anywhere else. He nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward to embrace me. Not the perfunctory hug of recent years, but something more genuine, a moment of connection amid confusion and revelation. For what it's worth, he said as he pulled away, this place is going to be incredible when it's finished. You've always had an eye for potential that others miss. The compliment warmed me, an acknowledgement of my professional judgment that had been lacking in our recent interactions. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot coming from an architect. As I showed him out, navigating around workers, now focused on framing interior walls, David paused at the front door. I'll talk to Jessica, he said. Not about Riverview, not yet, but about how we've been treating you. The garage thing. It wasn't right. Whatever else is happening, between us, you deserve better than that. We all deserve better than what we've been giving each other lately, I replied. Maybe this is an opportunity to rebuild on more honest terms. After David left, I returned to the makeshift break room, gathering our coffee cups and contemplating the conversation. It had gone neither as badly as I had feared, nor as smoothly as I had hoped. The truth was out about Riverview Holdings, but we had only begun to address the underlying issues in our relationship, my resentment over his recent treatment, his shock at discovering aspects of my identity he had never acknowledged, our mutual uncertainty about moving forward. Marco appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Everything okay, Ms. Carter? Your son seemed a bit shaken when he left. Family business, I explained vaguely. Complex but necessary. Marco nodded, understanding the universal language of complicated family dynamics. We're ready to review the electrical plan whenever you are, he said, tactfully changing the subject. I welcomed the return to practical matters, the concrete decisions about wiring and fixtures that would shape my future home. As we walked through the brownstone discussing technical specifications, I felt a curious lightness despite the emotional weight of David's visit. The truth had been spoken, uncomfortable as it was. What happened next would depend on choices we both made in the days and weeks to come. Later that evening, as I reviewed material samples in my apartment, my phone chimed with a text message from David. Had first conversation with Jessica about Christmas. Didn't go great, but it's a start. She sends apologies for the garage situation. More to discuss. Dinner next week? I smiled at the small but significant step forward. Dinner sounds perfect, I replied. Let me know when and where. Another chime. Your choice. Somewhere neutral, maybe? This time we'll actually ask about your life. Progress, however tentative, was still progress. The foundation had been laid for something new between us, not the uncomplicated mother-son relationship of his childhood or the distant formality of recent months, but something more balanced, more honest, more reflective of who we both had become. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of my evolving life, paint chips and fixture catalogs, partnership agreements and renovation plans, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in decades. The woman who had slept in her son's garage at Christmas was transforming, step by step, into someone who commanded respect rather than demanded it, who created boundaries rather than disappearing within them. And the son who had relegated me to that garage was being offered an opportunity to see his mother clearly, perhaps for the first time, to recognize the woman behind the maternal role, to establish a relationship based on mutual regard rather than habitual patterns. Whether he would embrace that opportunity remained to be seen. But I had done my part by speaking truth, by refusing to remain in the carefully limited space he and the Reynolds had assigned me. Whatever came next, I would face it as Eleanor Carter, investor, professional, soon-to-be brownstone owner, and, yes, still David's mother, but on new and more balanced terms. The space heater in the garage had been a turning point, not a destination. And for that unexpected catalyst toward authenticity, I remained oddly grateful. The inspection day arrived with unseasonable warmth for February, sunshine bathing Oakwood, estates in golden light that belied the tension I felt as I pulled up to David and Jessica's house. 2 weeks had passed since our dinner at Luciana's, a meal that had ended with tentative reconciliation but no final decision about the Riverview holding situation. Now, professional obligation required me to conduct the annual inspection of the property, regardless of our complicated personal dynamics. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my composure. I'd deliberately scheduled the inspection for a time when David would be at work, hoping to maintain professional boundaries and avoid emotional complications. Jessica would be home, according to the confirmation email she'd sent. Brisk, polite, and distinctly cool. Taking a deep breath, I collected my tablet, inspection checklist, and camera and approached the front door. The woman who answered my knock was not Jessica, but Victoria Reynolds, immaculately dressed in a cashmere sweater set and pearls despite the early hour. "Eleanor," she said, her perfect smile not quite reaching her eyes. What a surprise. "Victoria," I replied evenly. "I'm here for the scheduled property inspection." Jessica confirmed this timing worked for her. "Yes, well, Jessica had an emergency client consultation. She asked me to handle this situation." Victoria's emphasis suggested she considered the inspection more of an inconvenience than a routine property management procedure. "I see," I said, maintaining professional calm. "This shouldn't take more than an hour. I'll need access to all areas of the house, including attic and basement spaces." Victoria's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly before she stepped back to admit me. "Of course. Though I must say this entire arrangement seems irregular now that we understand the circumstances." I chose not to engage with the implied criticism. The inspection is standard procedure for all Riverview Holdings properties. The results help us identify maintenance issues before they become problematic and expensive. "Yes, David explained your company's methods." Victoria's tone made company sound like a dubious claim rather than a legitimate business entity. Though I still find it extraordinary that you didn't disclose your ownership interest when the children were purchasing the property. I set my tablet on the foyer table and met Victoria's gaze directly. Riverview Holdings is a separate legal entity from my personal finances. The sale was conducted through proper channels with all required disclosures. There was no legal or ethical obligation to reveal my connection to the investment company. Victoria raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Perhaps not legally, but surely as David's mother. I believe we should focus on the inspection, I interrupted gently but firmly. I'll start with the exterior evaluation if you don't mind. Without waiting for a response, I stepped back outside and began methodically photographing and noting the condition of the property's exterior features: roof, gutters, foundation, landscaping, driveway. I had conducted hundreds of similar inspections over the years, but never with Victoria Reynolds following 2 steps behind, watching my every move with barely concealed suspicion. The north corner of the roof shows signs of wear, I observed, zooming in with my camera to capture the area where several shingles had begun to curl. It will need attention within the next 2 years. Robert has already spoken with a roofing contractor, Victoria informed me. He's taking a personal interest in ensuring the children's home is properly maintained. The implication was clear. The Reynolds family could handle any issues without my intervention. I simply nodded and continued my assessment, noting a hairline crack in the foundation that would need monitoring and evidence of improper drainage along the east side of the property. Inside, the tension continued as I examined each room, opening closets, checking for water damage, testing electrical outlets, and inspecting HVAC systems. Victoria maintained a running commentary that alternated between defending the property's condition and subtly questioning my authority to evaluate it. Jessica has engaged an award-winning designer for the kitchen renovation, she informed me as I noted the substandard cabinet construction and inadequate ventilation system. They'll be replacing everything this summer. Cost is no object when it comes to creating proper entertaining spaces. A renovation would certainly address these issues, I agreed neutrally. Though I would recommend upgrading the electrical panel before undertaking any major kitchen work. The current system isn't adequate for modern appliances. Victoria's phone chimed and she glanced at the screen. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the hallway to take the call. Left temporarily alone in the kitchen, I felt a wave of complex emotions. This house, a property I had purchased, renovated, and sold to previous owners before indirectly selling it again to my own son, was being reshaped according to Reynolds family standards, my professional observations tolerated rather than valued. The irony wasn't lost on me. I technically owned the place through Riverview, yet had less input into its care than Victoria, who had no ownership stake whatsoever. I continued to the second floor, systematically working through bedrooms and bathrooms, noting issues with the master shower installation that could lead to water damage if not addressed. In what had been designated as a future nursery, I found evidence of a small roof leak that had stained the ceiling. Victoria rejoined me as I was examining the attic access. "Jessica will be joining us shortly," she announced. Her appointment concluded earlier than expected. I nodded, focusing on the poorly insulated attic space and evidence of past rodent activity. "This insulation should be replaced," I commented, making notes on my tablet. "It's inadequate for energy efficiency and shows signs of pest damage." "I'm sure Robert's contractor will include that in his assessment," Victoria replied dismissively. "He's quite thorough." We had just descended to the main floor when the front door opened, and Jessica entered, looking polished in a designer suit that probably cost more than a month of my mortgage payments. Her expression when she saw me was carefully composed, not hostile, but decidedly guarded. "Eleanor," she greeted me with professional courtesy. "I hope Mother has been helpful with the inspection." "Victoria has been very accommodating," I replied diplomatically. "I've nearly completed my assessment, just the basement remains." Jessica nodded crisply. "I'll show you down," she said, moving toward a door off the kitchen. "Mother, would you mind making some coffee? I'm sure we could all use some." It was a transparent attempt to separate us, but Victoria accepted the dismissal with grace. "Of course, darling. Eleanor, cream and sugar?" "Black is fine, thank you," I said, following Jessica down the basement stairs. Once we were alone in the partially finished lower level, Jessica turned to face me directly. "David told me about your dinner conversation," she said without preamble, "about his doubts regarding his career path and our life choices." The statement caught me off guard. I hadn't expected such directness, nor had I realized David had shared those intimate reflections with his wife. "I see," I replied carefully. "Do you?" Jessica's perfectly maintained exterior showed a crack of genuine emotion. Not anger, as I might have expected, but something closer to uncertainty. "Because, since that dinner, my husband has been questioning everything we've built together. He's talking about leaving his father's firm to start his own sustainable architecture practice. About selling this house to find something more authentic to our actual needs." I kept my expression neutral despite my surprise at how far David's reconsideration had apparently progressed. "Those sound like significant potential changes," I acknowledged. "Changes inspired by you," Jessica said pointedly. "By your sudden transformation from accommodating mother to independent businesswoman with secret investment companies and brownstone renovations." "My recent life changes weren't made to influence David," I clarified. "They were personal decisions about my own future and priorities." "Perhaps," Jessica conceded, "but the timing is difficult to ignore. Just as we're establishing ourselves in Bayside Heights society, just as David is positioning himself for partnership at Reynolds and Associates, you emerge with this whole new identity that makes him question our choices." I considered her words carefully, recognizing the genuine concern beneath her accusatory tone. "Jessica, I have no interest in disrupting your marriage or David's career, but I can't pretend to be less than I am to make others more comfortable with their choices." Jessica leaned against the basement wall, arms crossed protectively. "Do you know what it's like to grow up with Victoria Reynolds as your mother? The expectations, the constant evaluation, the impossibly high standards?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but I sensed it was crucial to understanding her perspective. "I can only imagine it would be challenging," I offered. "Challenging," Jessica repeated with a small, humorless laugh. "That's diplomatic. She crafted my entire existence to reflect well on the Reynolds name, the right schools, the right friends, the right career in her design firm. My marriage to David was the first decision she actually approved of without reservation." This vulnerability from the usually composed Jessica surprised me. "Because of his talent as an architect?" I guessed. "Because he was hungry for acceptance," Jessica corrected bluntly. "Mother recognized in David someone who would work tirelessly to fit into our world, who would never challenge the Reynolds way of doing things." She sighed, running a hand through her perfect hair in a gesture reminiscent of David. "And now he's talking about sustainable design and authentic living and walking away from everything we've planned." I felt a complicated mixture of pride in David's awakening and sympathy for Jessica's predicament. "People evolve," I said gently. "The man you married is still there, but perhaps with a renewed connection to values and dreams he set aside. Values and dreams that don't include a house in Oakwood Estates or a future at Reynolds and Associates," Jessica pointed out, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Values and dreams that might not include me either, if I'm being completely honest." The rawness of her fear caught at my heart, despite our often adversarial relationship. "Has David said that?" "Not directly," she admitted. "But I know what marrying into the Reynolds family involves. It's a package deal. The career, the social obligations, the specific lifestyle. If he rejects one part, the rest may follow." I considered my response carefully. aware of treading a delicate line between honesty and interference in their marriage. Jessica, I can't speak for David's intentions, but questioning certain aspects of his life doesn't necessarily mean he's questioning his commitment to you. She studied me with an intensity that reminded me of her father's shrewd assessment. You really believe that? I do, I said truthfully. From everything I've observed, his feelings for you appear genuine, separate from his professional ambitions or social aspirations. Jessica seemed to weigh my words, searching for hidden agendas or manipulation. Finding none, her shoulders relaxed slightly. We should complete the inspection, she said finally, professional composure returning. Mother will wonder what's taking so long. We toured the basement methodically, my notes focusing on inadequate waterproofing and outdated electrical systems. As we worked, a fragile truce seemed to form between us. Not friendship, certainly, but perhaps a mutual recognition of shared concern for David's well-being, despite our different perspectives on what that should entail. Upstairs, we rejoined Victoria, who had prepared coffee with the precision of a laboratory scientist. As we sat at the kitchen island reviewing my preliminary findings, the front door opened unexpectedly. David appeared, looking slightly disheveled, and entirely surprised to find the three of us gathered in his kitchen. Mom, he said, clearly caught off guard. The inspection. That was today? Scheduled for 10 o'clock, I confirmed, noting his uncharacteristically casual attire, jeans and a sweater rather than his usual business suit. I didn't expect you'd be home. An awkward silence fell as David glanced between his wife, his mother-in-law, and me, clearly assessing the dynamics in the room. I took a personal day, he explained, setting his keys on the counter. Some things I needed to handle. Victoria's eyebrows rose fractionally. On a Tuesday? Nothing serious, I hope. Actually, David said, an unfamiliar resolve in his voice, I had a meeting with Jake Donovan. The name meant nothing to me, but Jessica's head snapped up in recognition. The sustainable design consultant? The one who left Dad's firm to start his own practice? David nodded, holding his wife's gaze steadily. Jake's looking for a partner with traditional architectural training to complement his environmental expertise. Someone who can bridge conventional development with sustainable practices. Victoria set down her coffee cup with a sharp click against the marble countertop. Surely you're not considering leaving Reynolds and Associates. Robert has been grooming you for partnership. I'm exploring options, David replied, his tone respectful but firm. Jake's approach aligns with my original passion for architecture, creating spaces that work in harmony with natural environments rather than imposing upon them. I remained silent, observing this family dynamic from my unique position as both outsider and deeply connected insider. David's stance, literally and figuratively, had shifted from our Christmas encounter. He stood straighter, met gazes more directly, spoke with clearer conviction. Jessica's expression was complex. Concern, yes, but also a flicker of something that might have been reluctant admiration. What exactly does exploring options mean in practical terms? She asked. It means I'm considering what I want my career to look like, David explained. Whether the path I've been following is truly the one I want to continue, or if it's time to recalibrate. Victoria's mouth tightened into a thin line. David, may I remind you that Robert took a significant chance bringing you into the firm, straight from university. Many young architects would give anything for such an opportunity. I'm aware of that, David acknowledged, and I'm grateful for everything Robert has taught me. But gratitude doesn't obligate me to abandon my own professional vision indefinitely. The statement hung in the air between them, a quiet declaration of independence that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. I felt a surge of pride in my son's growing self-assertion, even as I recognized the complications it created in his marriage and family connections. Victoria rose smoothly, gathering her designer handbag. I think we should continue this discussion when tempers are Less immediate, she suggested, her control firmly back in place. Jessica, perhaps you could walk me out. With pointed looks at both David and me, Victoria swept toward the front door, Jessica following after a moment's hesitation. The message was clear. Whatever family drama was unfolding, it should not play out in front of me, regardless of my maternal connection. When we were alone, David exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Sorry about that. I didn't realize everyone would be here. Alt? Property inspections wait for no man, I quipped, attempting to lighten the moment, though I certainly didn't expect a dramatic career announcement to be part of today's agenda. A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. Neither did I, exactly. The meeting with Jake was preliminary, just exploring possibilities. But seeing everyone here together, discussing the house as if it were a chess piece in some larger game of social positioning, it crystallized some things for me. Such as, I asked, genuinely curious about his thought process. David leaned against the counter, his posture more relaxed than I'd seen in months. That I've been living someone else's version of success. That I've allowed external validation, the Reynolds approval, Bayside Heights acceptance, the right address, the right job title, to override my own internal compass. The insight impressed me with its clarity and self-awareness. That's a significant realization, I observed. One you've been modeling without explicitly preaching, David acknowledged. Watching you reclaim your authentic professional self, make bold choices about your future, stand firm in your expertise even when others dismiss it. It's been, I don't know, illuminating. His words touched me deeply, suggesting that my recent life changes had influenced him not through deliberate intervention, but through simple example. I never intended to disrupt your life, I told him honestly. These changes were about reclaiming myself, not changing you. I know, David said. That's what makes it so powerful. You weren't trying to teach me anything. You were just finally living authentically, and it made me question why I wasn't doing the same. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Again, and Jessica returned alone, her expression carefully composed. Mother has gone home, she announced unnecessarily. She suggests we continue family discussions without complications. Her glance in my direction made it clear I was the complication in question. This is a property inspection, I said, reverting to professional mode to ease the tension. I've completed my evaluation and can email the full report with recommendations. Within 48 hours. The house is generally sound but needs attention in several areas I've documented. Jessica nodded crisply, all vulnerability from our basement conversation now concealed behind her perfect hostess facade. That would be fine. Thank you for your thoroughness. An awkward silence fell, the three of us caught in a triangle of complex relationships and unspoken tensions. I gathered my tablet and inspection materials, recognizing that my professional obligations were complete, and my continued presence would only complicate an already difficult situation between husband and wife. I should go, I said, moving toward Day. The foyer. You have matters to discuss that don't require my input. David followed me to the door, Jessica hanging back in the kitchen. Mom, he said quietly, thanks for handling this inspection professionally despite everything. I respect boundaries, David, I assured him. Personal relationships and business obligations can coexist with proper compartmentalization. He nodded, then surprised me by asking, the brownstone renovation, how's it progressing? On schedule for the most part, I told him, warming to the neutral yet personal topic. The plumbing replacement took longer than expected, but we've uncovered some original features that had been hidden for decades. Marble fireplace surrounds, pocket doors, even some stained glass transoms that had been boarded over. I'd like to see it again, David said. Maybe help with some of the architectural decisions, if you'd welcome the input. The offer touched me more than I could express. My son, the trained architect, offering his professional expertise to my project, acknowledging my renovation as worthy of his serious attention rather than dismissing it as a middle-aged whim. "I'd like that very much," I said simply. Jessica appeared in the hallway behind him, her expression unreadable. "Eleanor was just leaving," David explained, turning slightly to include his wife. "We were discussing the brownstone renovation." "How fascinating," Jessica said with perfect politeness that revealed nothing of her actual thoughts. "I'm sure it's quite the project." An idea occurred to me, perhaps impulsive, possibly misguided, but potentially important for the evolving dynamics between us. "You're both welcome to visit," I offered. "Perhaps this weekend?" "The major structural work is nearly complete, and I'm making decisions about finishes and restoration details. David's architectural perspective would be valuable. And Jessica, your design experience might offer insights I hadn't considered." Jessica's surprise at being included was evident despite her social poise. "Thank you," she said after a moment. "I'll need to check our calendar." "Of course," I replied easily. "It's an open invitation. The brownstone will be my home, but also a showcase for Sophia's firm. Professional perspectives are always welcome, regardless of personal complications." As I drove away from Oakwood Estates, I reflected on the unexpected developments of the morning. What had begun as a routine property inspection had revealed fault lines in David and Jessica's carefully constructed life, his growing dissatisfaction with the Reynolds-approved career path, her fear that his evolution might leave her behind, Victoria's determination to maintain control over their choices. My role in this family drama remained ambiguous. I hadn't deliberately set out to inspire David's reassessment of his life choices, yet my own transformation had clearly influenced his thinking. The question now was how to support my son's authentic growth without undermining his marriage or inserting myself inappropriately into decisions that were ultimately his to make. The renovation crew was taking lunch break when I arrived at the brownstone, giving me a quiet moment to walk through the evolving spaces alone. The contrast between this project and the Oakwood Estates inspection couldn't have been more striking. Here, every decision reflected my personal vision and professional judgment, without deference to others' expectations or social positioning. The brownstone was becoming a physical manifestation of my reclaimed identity, honoring its historical integrity while adapting to contemporary needs, preserving what was valuable from the past while embracing new possibilities. As I stood in what would eventually be my kitchen, sunlight streaming through newly restored windows, I felt a sense of peace despite the morning's tensions. Whatever happened with David and Jessica, whatever complicated path our family relationships might take in the coming months, I had created this sanctuary for myself, a place that was truly mine, not defined by my role as mother or former wife or any external expectations. The garage at Christmas had been a turning point, forcing me to confront how profoundly the dynamics with my son had shifted. But the brownstone represented the positive outcome of that painful realization. Not just a reclaiming of professional identity, but a physical space that embodied my hard-won wisdom and independence. My phone chimed with an incoming text from David. "Jessica and I would like to take you up on the brownstone visit. Sunday afternoon? We have some news to share." I stared at the message, wondering what news might entail. Career changes, marriage developments, house decisions, perhaps all three. Whatever it was, the fact that they wanted to share it with me in my space rather than theirs suggested a shifting of relationship patterns, a tentative step toward new ways of connecting. "Sunday works perfectly," I replied, looking forward to it. Setting my phone aside, I turned my attention back to the brownstone's soaring ceilings and elegant proportions. The work crews would return soon, bringing noise and activity and progress. But for this quiet moment, I allowed myself to simply be present in this manifestation of my transformation. From a woman who slept in her son's garage at Christmas to one who created spaces both physical and emotional on her own terms. The why. Journey wasn't complete, of course. Relationships continued to evolve, boundaries to be negotiated, mutual respect to be established. But looking around at what I had already built, both in this brownstone and in my reclaimed sense of self, I felt ready for whatever came next. Not just as David's mother, but as Eleanor Carter in full. Sunday afternoon arrived with perfect early spring weather, warm sunshine, gentle breeze, the first hints of green emerging in the brownstone's neglected garden. I spent the morning arranging a small seating area in what would eventually be my living room, borrowing furniture from the renovation crew's break space and adding touches of home. A vase of fresh tulips, a pot of coffee, pastries from the neighborhood bakery. At precisely 2 o'clock, a car pulled up outside. Through the newly restored front windows, I watched David and Jessica approach, walking slightly apart but together nonetheless. Their body language suggested tension but not hostility. Two people navigating difficult terrain rather than adversaries. At war. "Welcome," I greeted them, opening the door before they could knock. "Thank you for coming." David embraced me warmly while Jessica offered a tentative smile. "The exterior restoration is gorgeous," she commented, studying the facade with professional interest. "Those original details around the windows, they must have taken significant effort to preserve." Her genuine appreciation for the craftsmanship surprised me. "Marco's team includes 2 master restorers who specialize in historical elements," I explained, pleased by her engagement. "Would you like the tour?" We moved through the brownstone room by room, David noting structural improvements, while Jessica commented on design potential. The atmosphere between us felt different from previous encounters, more collegial, less performative. When we reached the kitchen area, still just framed walls and rough plumbing, David pulled out a roll of paper, tucked under his arm. "I took the liberty of sketching some ideas," he said, spreading the drawings across a makeshift work table, "for the kitchen and garden connection." I studied the plans, impressed by his thoughtful integration of modern functionality with the building's historical character. "These are remarkable, David. You've understood exactly what I'm trying to achieve here." Jessica leaned in to examine the drawings, professional curiosity overcoming personal reserve. "The sightlines from the kitchen to the garden are inspired," she acknowledged. "It maintains period authenticity while creating flow for contemporary living." The 3 of us discussed design possibilities with unexpected harmony, professional. Respect temporarily bridging personal complications. When we eventually settled in the makeshift living area with coffee and pastries, I finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You mentioned having news to share?" David and Jessica exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that suggested hours of private discussion. David nodded and Jessica straightened slightly. "We've made some decisions," she began, "about the house, about David's career path, about our future." "We're selling the Oakwood Estates house," David continued. "It was the right address, but the wrong home for who we actually are." "And who are you?" I asked gently. "Still figuring that out," Jessica admitted with unexpected candor. "But not people who need a status symbol property with rooms we never use and features designed to impress others rather than serve us." David reached for her hand, a gesture of solidarity that suggested their journey, however difficult, was one they were navigating together. "I've given notice at Reynolds & Associates," he added. "I'll be joining Jake Donovan's sustainable architecture practice as a partner." "Robert must be disappointed," I observed, thinking of Victoria's response to this family rebellion. "Furious is more accurate," Jessica said with a small, rueful smile. "Mother is convinced we're having some sort of shared breakdown. She's scheduled us for therapy with the family's crisis counselor." "And how do you feel about these changes?" I directed the question to Jessica, recognizing her transition might be more challenging than David's, given her lifelong immersion in Reynolds' family expectations. Terrified, she admitted. Excited, uncertain, all at once. The Reynolds path was restrictive but clear. This new direction is unmapped territory. The best journeys often are, I offered. We have one more piece of news, David said after a moment, about the Riverview Holdings mortgage. I braced myself, uncertain what was coming. Yes? We'd like to maintain it, he stated simply. Not because of the favorable interest rate, though that's certainly a factor, but because it represents something important. Which is? I asked. Transparency between us, Jessica explained. No more pretending you're just David's mother with limited financial understanding. No more dismissing your professional expertise. No more compartmentalizing our relationship into convenient boxes. We're selling the Oakwood Estates house, David continued, but we're hoping you might consider a different kind of partnership. He unrolled another set of plans, preliminary drawings for a modest structure nestled within a wooded lot. It's 5 acres just outside the city. We're thinking of building a home there designed around sustainable principles. Jake's excited about using it as a showcase project. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely impressed by the innovative design that harmonized with the natural landscape. We'd like your input, Jessica said, surprising me again. Both as David's mother and as a real estate professional with vision for property potential. If you're willing. The offer represented something profound, not just reconciliation, but a fundamental reshaping of our relationship on more balanced terms. No longer the sacrificial mother relegated to the garage, nor the secret landlord wielding unseen power, but a respected advisor and family member with acknowledged expertise and value. I'd be honored, I said simply. As sunlight streamed through, the brownstone's tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I felt something settle within me. A peaceful recognition that the painful Christmas garage incident had catalyzed necessary growth for all of us. David was reclaiming his authentic professional passion. Jessica was discovering identity beyond Reynolds' family expectations, and I was finally being seen, not just as a mother, but as a whole person with skills, dreams, and wisdom to contribute. The woman who had slept in her son's garage at Christmas had emerged from that humiliation stronger, clearer, and more fully herself, and in doing so, had somehow helped her son find his way back to his own authentic path as well. Sometimes, it takes a night in the garage to find your way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.